My name is Nathaniel Carter, and on March 12, 2018, I died. At least that's what the doctors said. But what I experienced in those moments, what I saw, what I felt, was more real than anything I had ever known in my time on this earth. When I came back, I wasn't the same person. My entire life, everything I had believed about God, faith, and salvation, it all changed in an instant. I was raised in a devout Mormon family where faith wasn't just something we practiced. It was the foundation of our entire existence. From the time I could walk, I was taught that God's love had to be earned through obedience, good works, and absolute devotion to the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I never questioned it. Every Sunday, I sat in church with my family, absorbing lessons on righteousness, tithing, and temple ordinances, convinced that my eternal destiny depended on how well I followed these principles. I believed that if I lived a good enough life, I would one day stand before God, worthy of His presence. As I grew older, my commitment only deepened. I became a leader in my church, guiding others in faith, teaching scripture studies, and dedicating my time to serving the community. I married my high school sweetheart, Rachel, and together we built a life centered around faith and family. We raised our children in the church, teaching them the same values I had been raised with, ensuring they followed the right path. But deep down, I carried a quiet fear. A fear that no matter how much I did, it would never be enough. I pushed that fear aside, convincing myself that if I just tried harder, served more, prayed more, I could earn God's approval. Then, out of nowhere, my life took a turn I never saw coming. Started with small things: fatigue, headaches, a dull ache in my back that wouldn't go away. I ignored it at first, convincing myself it was just stress or exhaustion from my busy schedule. But as the weeks went on, the pain grew worse. It became harder to get through the day, and eventually, even standing for long periods left me completely drained. I finally went to the doctor, expecting nothing more than a routine checkup, maybe some medication for back pain. Instead, I was met with a look of concern I had never seen before. The tests came back, and the news hit me like a freight train. I had stage 4 cancer. The words didn't even seem real. I had always believed that if I lived righteously, if I followed God's commands, He would protect me. But now, here I was, staring down a death sentence, wondering if all my faith had been for nothing. Everything in my life changed overnight. My wife, Rachel, tried to stay strong, but I could see the fear in her eyes every time she looked at me. My kids didn't understand why their dad couldn't play with them like he used to, why I was always too tired, why I spent so much time in hospitals. My church family gathered around me, offering prayers and support, but deep down, I felt something I had never allowed myself to feel before: doubt. Why was this happening to me? Hadn't I done everything right? Hadn't I lived exactly how I was supposed to? As the weeks turned into months, my condition only got worse. The treatments weren't working, and the doctors were running out of options. I lost weight rapidly, my skin turned pale, and my body grew weaker with each passing day. I could see it in the way people looked at me. They were preparing for the worst, even if no one dared to say it out loud. But the hardest part wasn't the physical pain. It was the silence from God. I prayed harder than I ever had before, begging Him to heal me, to give me a sign that He was still with me. But all I felt was emptiness. Late one evening, after another exhausting round of treatment, I lay in bed with Rachel sitting beside me, holding my hand. My body was drained, but my mind was racing. I thought about my life, about everything I had done to be a good man, a faithful servant of God. And yet, here I was dying. A terrifying thought crept into my mind. What if I wasn't good enough? What if, after everything, I still wouldn't make it to heaven's highest glory? I had spent my entire life working towards salvation, but now, staring death in the face, I realized I had no certainty that I was actually saved. That night, something changed. My body felt heavier than ever, my breathing shallower. I could barely keep my eyes open, and a deep, overwhelming exhaustion overtook me. I could faintly hear Rachel whispering my name, but her voice sounded distant. Then, suddenly, everything around me faded to black. I felt my body go completely still. There was no pain, no sound, nothing. And in that moment, I knew I had died. At first, there was only darkness, an endless, consuming void. I expected fear, panic, something, but instead, I felt nothing. No pain, no emotion, just an overwhelming stillness. Then, without warning, I became aware of myself again. I wasn't in my body, yet I could still think, still feel. And then I started to rise. It was as if something unseen was pulling me upward, drawing me away from the world I had known. As I ascended, a light appeared in the distance, unlike anything I had ever seen before. It wasn't just bright, it was alive. It pulsed with warmth and energy, radiating a love so deep it went beyond words. The closer I got, the more I realized that this wasn't just a light. It was a presence. It was something, or rather someone, waiting for me. Then, all at once, I was standing in a place that no words could ever describe. I looked around and saw beauty beyond anything I had ever imagined. The colors were richer, more vibrant than anything on earth. The air itself felt alive, filled with music that wasn't being played, yet could be felt in the depths of my soul. A sense of peace unlike anything I had ever known filled me completely, washing away every fear, every doubt. I knew without a doubt that I was standing in heaven. And then I saw him. At first, I couldn't fully comprehend what I was seeing. A figure stood before me, radiating a light that was far greater than anything around us. It wasn't blinding, but it was powerful, as if every part of me recognized who he was before my mind could even process it. And then he spoke, not with words exactly, but with something deeper, something that resonated through my very soul. "Nathaniel," he said, his voice filled with both authority and love. "I have been with you all along." It was Jesus, not the distant, painted figure I had seen in church, but someone more real, more alive than anything I had ever known. His eyes met mine, and in that instant, I felt something break inside of me. Every fear, every doubt, every question I had ever carried was suddenly laid bare before him. Yet there was no judgment, only love, pure and complete. I wanted to speak, to tell him how much I had tried to live righteously, to prove myself worthy. But before I could say a word, he already knew. "You have spent your life trying to earn something that has already been given," he said gently. His words hit me harder than anything I had ever heard. I had spent my entire life believing that salvation was something I had to achieve, something I had to work for. And yet, standing here in front of Jesus himself, I realized how wrong I had been. It wasn't about my efforts. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about him. Tears filled my eyes as I struggled to grasp the truth of what he was saying. All those years of striving, of wondering if I had done enough, and here he was telling me that salvation was never about what I could do, but about what he had already done for me. I stood there, overwhelmed, as Jesus looked deep into my soul. I didn't just hear his words, I felt them. They carried a truth so undeniable that I couldn't resist it, yet a part of me still struggled. But I followed the commandments. I finally managed to say, I did everything I was taught to do. Isn't that what God wants? Jesus' expression remained full of love, but there was something else too. Understanding. He knew my heart, knew the weight I had carried for so long. Your efforts matter, Nathaniel, he said, but not in the way you think. Good works are not what saves you. They are a response to my love, not a requirement to earn it. His words shattered everything I had believed. I had spent my life trying to be good enough, constantly striving, constantly wondering if I had done enough to please God. But now, Jesus himself was telling me that I had it backward. Salvation wasn't something to be achieved. It was something to be received. I saw flashes of my life. Every prayer, every sacrifice, every desperate attempt to prove my worth. And yet, none of those things had made me worthy. I had always believed God's love had to be earned. But Jesus was telling me that it had always been mine. Tears streamed down my face as the weight of my own misunderstanding pressed down on me. I had tried to work my way into heaven, never realizing that Jesus had already made the way for me. I died for you so that you wouldn't have to carry that burden, he said, his voice filled with both power and gentleness. You were never meant to save yourself. That's why I came. My heart broke, not from pain, but from relief. All the striving, all the fear, all the doubt. It was unnecessary. Jesus had done it all on the cross. And now, standing before him, I finally understood grace. I wanted to fall to my knees, but it was as if I had no physical body, only my soul, fully exposed in the presence of Jesus. The love radiating from him was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't just kindness. It was pure, complete, unconditional love. A love that didn't depend on what I had done or how hard I had tried. A love that had been there all along, even when I had been too busy trying to earn it to see that it was already mine. For the first time in my life, I felt free. Free from the fear of not measuring up. Free from the endless weight of wondering if I had done enough. I realized then that I had never truly known Jesus. Not like this. Then, suddenly, the light around us shifted, and Jesus' expression became serious. There is something else you need to see, he said. Before I could respond, the beauty around me began to fade. The colors, the warmth, the music, all of it was pulled away in an instant. In its place, a darkness appeared, thick and suffocating. I felt a heavy pressure, a cold emptiness unlike anything I had ever known. And then I heard the screams. It was a sound so full of agony, regret, and hopelessness that it made my soul tremble. I didn't want to see what was ahead, but I couldn't look away. I was being shown hell. The place before me was nothing like the fire and brimstone I had imagined growing up. It was far worse. It was separation, complete and utter separation from God. I saw people, but they weren't together. Each one was isolated, trapped in their own suffering. Some cried out for help, others wept in silence, their faces twisted with regret. The worst part wasn't the torment, it was the hopelessness. They knew, without a doubt, that they had rejected the one thing that could have saved them. They had chosen this, and now there was no way out. A deep sorrow filled my soul as I watched these people, trapped in despair. They weren't screaming from physical pain, but from something far worse, the realization that they had separated themselves from God forever. The regret in their eyes was unbearable. I could feel it, this crushing weight of knowing that they had spent their lives chasing things that could never satisfy, rejecting the only one who could. They had been given a choice, and they had chosen to live without him. Now they would remain in that choice for eternity. I turned to Jesus, my heart pounding. "Why are you showing me this?" My voice trembled, barely above a whisper. "I don't understand." His gaze was full of both sorrow and love. "Because many still believe they can save themselves," he said. "They think they have time. They think their good works will be enough. But without me, they have nothing. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." His words echoed through my very being. The people I was seeing weren't just bad people. Some of them had been just like me, good, moral, religious, but they had missed the truth. They had spent their lives trying to earn something that could only be received through grace. Then, as quickly as it had come, the darkness vanished. I was back in the light, standing before Jesus once more. The peace of heaven returned, but my heart still ached from what I had seen. "You must go back," Jesus said. I shook my head, overwhelmed. "I don't want to go back," I whispered. "I want to stay here with you." His expression softened, but he remained firm. "It's not your time yet. There are people who need to hear this. You have to tell them the truth." I didn't know how I could possibly explain all of this, but before I could say another word, everything around me faded to black. Suddenly, I felt myself being pulled downward, like I was being yanked from heaven back into my body. The warmth of Jesus' presence faded, and in its place came pain, deep, excruciating pain. My chest ached, my lungs burned, and I could hear the faint, muffled sounds of voices around me. Then, with a gasp, I opened my eyes. The bright, sterile lights of the hospital room came into focus. I was back. The room was chaotic. Nurses and doctors were rushing around me, voices filled with shock and disbelief. I heard my wife, Rachel, sobbing beside me, gripping my hand so tightly it hurt. "Nathaniel, oh my God, you're alive." Her face was streaked with tears, but in her eyes, I saw something else. A nurse shouted for a doctor, and I could hear the monitors beeping wildly. "This is impossible," one of them muttered under his breath. He was gone. I didn't understand what had just happened. I could still feel the weight of everything I had seen, everything Jesus had told me. But now I was back in my fragile, broken body. Hours later, after the initial chaos had settled, the doctors ran more tests. What they found left them speechless. The cancer that had been eating away at my body, the disease that had been declared terminal, was completely gone. There wasn't a single trace of it left. I had been healed. My doctor, a man who had seen hundreds of patients in his career, just shook his head in disbelief. "I don't have a medical explanation for this," he admitted. But whatever happened to you, it defies everything we know. I knew exactly what had happened. Jesus had brought me back for a reason, and now I had no choice but to fulfill the mission he had given me. As I lay in that hospital bed, reality began to sink in. I had died, met Jesus, and been sent back for a reason. The weight of that truth settled deep in my heart, but so did the fear of what came next. How was I supposed to explain this? Would anyone believe me? I had spent my entire life in a faith that emphasized works over grace, a faith that taught salvation was something to be earned. But now I knew the truth. It was never about what I could do, but about what Jesus had already done. That truth changed everything. And yet, I knew that telling people, especially my family and my church, wouldn't be easy. Rachel was the first person I told. I took her hand and, through a shaky voice, told her everything. The light, Jesus' words, the vision of hell, and the truth about salvation. Tears filled her eyes as she listened, and for a long time, she didn't say anything. Finally, she whispered, "I believe you." She had seen the miracle with her own eyes. She had watched me die, and now she was seeing me alive, completely healed. I could tell she was shaken, trying to process what this meant for everything we had ever believed. But deep down, I knew she felt it too. God was calling us to something different. The real challenge came when I shared my story with my church. I stood in front of the congregation, my heart pounding in my chest, and told them exactly what had happened. I told them about my encounter with Jesus, how he had told me that salvation was not something we could earn, but a gift freely given through grace. I told them about the people in hell, the regret in their eyes, the weight of their choice to reject him. As I spoke, I saw a mix of reactions. Some were in tears, deeply moved by my testimony. Others looked angry, uncomfortable. And then, after I finished, a man in the front row stood up and asked, "Are you saying everything we've been taught is wrong?" For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I looked around the room at the faces staring back at me, some filled with curiosity, others with doubt, and a few with outright resistance. I took a deep breath, remembering Jesus' words to me. "I'm saying that I met Jesus, and he showed me the truth," I finally said. "He told me that salvation isn't something we can earn, because he already paid the price. It's not about being good enough. It's about accepting his grace." A murmur spread through the room. Some nodded in quiet agreement, while others exchanged uneasy glances. I saw a woman in the back wipe tears from her eyes, and I knew some of them had been feeling the same burden I once had. They, too, had wondered if they had done enough, if they had truly secured their place in heaven. But others weren't so open to what I was saying. An elder in the church stood up, his face tense. "Nathaniel, you've always been a faithful man. But this isn't in line with our teachings." His voice was calm, but I could feel the weight behind his words. "Are you sure this wasn't just a dream?" I felt a lump in my throat, but I refused to waver. "It was more real than anything I've ever experienced," I said. "I didn't just hear Jesus. I stood before him. I saw heaven. I saw hell. And I was given a second chance, not to keep this to myself, but to tell others that he is the only way." A heavy silence followed. I knew then that some people would accept what I was saying, and others wouldn't. But that didn't change the truth. I had seen Jesus. I had been saved by grace. And now I had a mission. After that day, my life was never the same. Some people in the church embraced my testimony, their hearts stirred by what I had shared. They told me they had secretly struggled with the same doubts, the fear of never being good enough, the pressure to earn salvation. For them, my story was confirmation of something they had always felt deep down but had been too afraid to say out loud. But not everyone saw it that way. Some distanced themselves from me entirely. Friends I had known my entire life started avoiding my calls. Others pulled me aside and warned me to stop speaking about grace in a way that contradicted church teachings. I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. One day, I was approached by an old mentor, Brother James, a man I had respected since childhood. He sat across from me, his hands folded, his expression unreadable. "Nathaniel," he said, "I don't doubt that you believe what you saw, but do you really want to throw away everything we've been taught? You've always been a leader in this church. Think about your family. Think about your reputation." His words were heavy, meant to make me reconsider, but I had already made my choice. "Brother James," I said, "I didn't choose this. I died. I met Jesus, and he showed me that salvation comes from him alone. I can't stay silent about that." The conversation ended with a sigh and a slow shake of his head. "Then I guess we see things differently," he said before walking away. That was the moment I truly understood that my life would never go back to the way it was. But I didn't regret it. Jesus had given me a second chance, not to fit in, not to protect my reputation, but to tell the truth. And the truth is this: salvation is not earned. It is a gift, and Jesus is offering it to every single one of us. The more I shared my story, the more I saw how many people needed to hear it. It wasn't just those in my old church. It was people from all walks of life, people who had spent years believing that they had to work their way into heaven. I started speaking at small gatherings, then at larger ones. I met people who had been crushed under the same weight I had carried, people who had spent their entire lives trying to be good enough but never feeling peace. Every time I shared what Jesus told me, that salvation was a gift, not a reward, I could see something in their eyes: relief, hope, freedom. But not everyone welcomed my message. Some pastors refused to let me speak at their churches, telling me that my experience was too radical or too different from their doctrine. Others accused me of making it up for attention, even though I had nothing to gain and had already lost so much. But I didn't let that stop me. I wasn't here to please people. I was here because Jesus had sent me back for a reason. Every time I felt discouraged, I remembered what I had seen, the regret in the eyes of those who had rejected him. I couldn't stay silent. If there was even one person out there who needed to hear the truth, I was going to tell it. As the years went by, I saw the impact of my testimony. People who had spent their lives trapped in religion but never truly knew Jesus gave their hearts to him. Others who had walked away from faith entirely began to see that God wasn't asking them to strive. He was asking them to surrender. And I, too, continued to change. My faith was no longer about following rules, about measuring up, about checking off the right boxes. It was about knowing Jesus personally, trusting in his grace, and living in the freedom that he had already won for me. I had been given a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. As my journey continued, I realized that my mission wasn't just to tell people about my near-death experience. It was to lead them to Jesus. I began traveling, speaking in churches, sharing my testimony wherever I could. Some listened with open hearts, desperate for the truth they had never heard before. Others remained skeptical, questioning whether my experience had been real. But I knew what I had seen. I had stood before Jesus. I had seen heaven and I had seen hell. And I knew beyond any doubt that the choice we make about Jesus is the most important decision of our lives. I started receiving messages from people around the world who had heard my story. Some had grown up like me, trapped in religion without relationship, following rules without ever truly knowing Jesus. Others had rejected God entirely, convinced that they weren't worthy of His love. But time and time again, I saw the same thing happen. Hearts were being transformed. Not because of me, but because of what Jesus had done. People who had spent their entire lives running from God were now surrendering to His grace, finally understanding that they didn't have to earn His love. It had been there all along. And so, I continue to share my story because I know there are still so many who need to hear it. If you are watching this and you feel that same burden I once carried, the feeling that no matter how much you do, you'll never be good enough, I want you to know that Jesus is calling you right now. He is not asking for your perfection. He is not waiting for you to be worthy. He already paid the price. All He asks is that you surrender to Him, accept His grace, trust in His love. Don't wait until it's too late. Don't be one of the souls I saw in hell, filled with regret, wishing they had made a different choice. You have the chance now. Will you take it? If this testimony has touched your heart, I encourage you to share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe to this channel for more testimonies. If you want to know more about how to truly surrender your life to Jesus, leave a comment below or reach out. I would love to pray with you. Thank you for watching, and remember, salvation is not something you earn. It is a gift, and Jesus is offering it to you right now.